I thought I was going home with just like 4 shots from the R5. Now I'm pretty sure I just had like 100 bracketed shots. Man, I love photography. This was awesome. Let me take another shot.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm just going to address the elephant in the room now. Yes, I did get rid of my nose ring after all of the mean comments that I get from some of you. Honestly, I just couldn't handle it anymore. I'm just kidding. I've looked it up. I did get a haircut though. So you probably clicked on this video to find out just how much the Canon R5 is going to change my photography. Well, if all you're here for is the answer, I'll tell you right now and save you some time. It's not going to change my photography. So then why the heck did I buy this thing? Well, for that answer, you'll have to keep watching. So I just want to first start out by saying this is not going to be a review. I quite literally just got the R5 and shot with it once yesterday, and I'm the type of person that wants to use something for a few months before ever giving it my finalized thoughts. This is more about my first thoughts and why I picked the R5 out of the many options that are out there. Recently, I had a viewer tell me they were tired of hearing gear doesn't matter from people like myself. Gear absolutely matters, but not in the many ways we as a photography community talk about it. If you try to compare something like an iPhone to a Sony a7 IV or Canon R5, it should be clear which device will take a higher resolution image with wider dynamic range and works better in something like Lightroom. However, the intention and message that comes from saying gear doesn't matter is to be the antithesis of the constant chatter about new cameras. To not get caught up in what camera is better than the other, and to simply focus on improving your craft rather than pixel peeping different brands' RAW files. Which, by the way, I'll have some RAW files you can peep at the end of the video. Look, I totally understand as a recovering gearhead, I fell into the same hole myself many years ago. To this day, I still enjoy improvements that come with updated pieces of tech. I read about them often, especially when I'm trying to make a decision on what to buy. There's a reason some of the most popular YouTubers out there are completely gear related. You just have to keep in mind that regardless of what you buy next, it's likely not going to magically change the content you're producing. The truth is, I didn't feel the need to upgrade from my 5D Mark IV to the R5, but sometimes life happens and things change. I'm saying goodbye to my 9-year-old C100 that I'm filming on right now, and I wanted a camera that could hopefully emulate the quality of that Super 35 sensor that's on the C100 while also taking all of my still images. The 5D Mark IV takes decent video, but its limited bitrate and terrible 4K codec really held it back, and I could never get its image to look nearly as good as the C100. So I needed something that was great at both, and thankfully, those exist quite a few brands here in 2021. The most exciting thing about the R5 for me is actually the articulating screen. It isn't 8K video or the pixel count, or even the crazy FPS, which, to be fair, I shoot landscape photography, and I'll never really care all that much about frames per second. I want stuff that makes my life easier and more reliable in the field. Like, for example, can I open the said articulating screen with gloves on? In the last 2 months when I'm out shooting, I've had gloves on. Take a look at this. Here on the X-T4 is a prime example. You can see that the screen is covered perfectly down here, and that the only way to get into the screen is right here, which is very hard to do with gloves on. However, on the R5, the screen goes all the way to the bottom of the frame of the camera. So what that means is, if I have gloves on, it's really easy for me to pull out the screen. This is the type of stuff that I care about. I highly consider the Canon R6, but after my 6D's back dial started malfunctioning and completely stopped working because I was in some light rain many years ago, I knew that I needed higher levels of weather sealing for that extra reliability in the field. Not to mention the lack of the top display of the screen would be something I would miss going from the 5D to the R6. I also thought about switching systems. I had my eyes on the Fujifilm GFX 100S, but ultimately couldn't justify the cost and it absolutely wouldn't handle the video in the way that I wanted it to. I considered Sony, but the increased cost in switching my lenses over, even though it's really only 2 lenses, didn't seem to have a lot of benefit. Not to mention, I like the form factor of both Canon and Nikon better than pretty much any of the other manufacturers out there. A viewer asked me about my thoughts on mirrorless, and the truth is, I don't really think it's even an option anymore. I could talk about this a bit in my 2021 guide on getting into photography that you can find here. If you're buying a new camera, there really isn't a lot of options left for a DSLR. I think you'd just be setting yourself in the past if you tried to avoid a mirrorless system. That being said, there's really only two big things to face when switching over to a mirrorless system, which is the viewfinder and lenses. With an adapter, I solved the lens issue, and getting adapted to an EVF has its benefits and drawbacks. A huge benefit is seeing the actual image you're going to capture in the EVF. A drawback would be not being able to compose a composition without the camera being on. It's really just something to adapt to, and the reality is, in landscape photography, I'm using the rear screen the majority of the time anyways. One thing I was concerned about is that I've never had to clean the dust off my sensor of the 5D Mark IV. I was made aware by some of the people on my live stream that they deal with cleaning their sensor quite often on their mirrorless system, and that concerned me. Thankfully, on the Canon R5, when you switch off the camera, it puts the shutter down, and that should hopefully protect it enough from the elements. I'll certainly know more about it in about 6 months, and I can tell you how much dust I have to end up cleaning off. At the end of it all, I put a lot more emphasis on things that don't necessarily make it to a spec sheet, and I feel like the world of camera systems gets inundated with the constant bombardment of the next best thing in terms of those specs. Remember that a camera is just a tool to help you create and capture a moment, to provide a creative expression in the form of a photograph. So after having my R5 act as a paperweight for a couple days because the lens adapter got lost in the mail, I was finally able to hunt one down locally. And if you're like me, I like real world tests, so instead of shooting some boring shots in my house, I do what I always do. I headed for the mountains. Enjoy.
Alright, so I've come up the mountain just to test out the R5. Not doing any scientific stuff. It's first day, literally, these are the first shots on the camera. It's no award-winning shot, that is for sure. Kind of just right next to the parking lot. What I really wanted to do was just come out here, get the buttons down, see what needs to be changed, see what I need to change on all the quick set stuff, and just kind of give a preliminary rundown of what I need to learn about the camera so that I feel comfortable shooting with it when I'm out in the field. I did a quick comparison shot between the 5D Mark IV and the R5, just to see what the shadow recovery and all that stuff is. I know it's pretty close, not a huge difference, but wanted to see for myself. Just take some comparison shots while I still can, just see what the differences are. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I'm doing up here. I'm probably only going to take this one shot. I might drive around, maybe get a sunset shot, and that'll be about it. Realistically, I just wanted to get it out in the field, get some shots in it, change things like I had the beep on for the self timer, so it's just beeping every time I'm taking a photo, which is no bueno. And yeah, so took some shots, and we'll see what happens.
All right, so here's the comparison shot I took, and like I said, definitely not an award-winning composition by any means, but I wanted to just get something into the camera that I can compare. The only difference between the two exposures is the Canon 5D Mark IV I was taken at a little bit quicker of a shutter speed because the light was changing, even though I tried to change the cameras out as fast as possible. Like I said, not really a scientific test, but I did want to try my best. I increased the exposure by about 0.15 on the 5D Mark IV just to try to match it to the Canon R5. Something I want to take a look at though is I left the white balance what the camera set, and you can tell if I go into the develop tab here and open the R5 image, the white balance is 5800 with a +6 tint, and if I open up the 5D Mark IV, it is 5550 with a +1 tint. Now what's interesting, if I match these two white balances to be the exact same or match it to the R5, there's a big difference in the color rendition of these two cameras. I don't think the light changed all that much between the two exposures, but I definitely see more of a warmer, slightly red tone to the 5D Mark IV image. So let me set this back to both images, and you can get an idea of the two images matched. So let's take a look really quick. Comparison shot zoomed in to 100% on both images. You can really get an idea that they're very similar. There's not a huge difference in terms of the picture quality between the two cameras. And I even brought up the shadows by 100 to do a comparison as well. Let me get that up. And on the left again is the R5, and on the right is the 5D Mark IV. There's slightly more red in the shadows here on the R5 and slightly less red, but again, that could be a color balance thing. It's going to be very hard to tell the difference between these two images in terms of their noise over YouTube. I can say, looking at the RAWs on my computer, they're very similar. I don't think there's a huge difference. I will say there's slightly more grain on the 5D Mark IV, but it is pretty minimal. I'll actually have these RAWs downloadable down below if you want to download them yourself and take a look, and you can really get an idea of how similar the image is on both of these cameras, and just an idea that the 5D Mark IV is still pretty good for being almost 4 years old, and that the images are quite similar. So hope you enjoy that. Let's continue on with the video.
Oh, absolutely beautiful sunset. Completely unplanned. I was just driving down the road from the last stuff you saw, and I was just gonna wait until sunset happened and head down the mountain. And I'm just driving on the road, and Longs Peak, there's a viewpoint between where I was in Estes Park, and normally I can't see Longs Peak. I think every time I pass by here it's either in clouds or not very clear, and I just pulled over. I didn't think I'd get any light, but man, absolutely gorgeous. Not entirely sure it actually worked. Oh, I gotta take some more shots. Not entirely sure it actually worked, just because there's not any light on front of the peak. It's all behind, but it is absolutely gorgeous. Let me see if I can show you in this camera. All right, I think the best light is done. I didn't even plan on taking this camera out. I was just gonna set this one up, take a few shots and talk about it later, but when I saw the light starting to change, I just had to, I had to include you guys. Absolutely beautiful. Again, don't know if I got anything. The light was just epic everywhere. And like I said, it wasn't on the front of the peaks, it was just behind the peaks. And I'm not sure how I can blend it together. I thought I was going home with just like 4 shots from the R5. Now I'm pretty sure I just had like 100 bracketed shots. Man, I love photography. This was awesome. Let me take another shot. The pastel colors happening right now are just absolutely gorgeous. There's so much mood on Longs Peak. You've got all of this, I know you can't really see it, but it's these just I guess wind coming off the peaks and moving the snow or the clouds that are there. And it is just absolutely gorgeous. Oh, awesome. Awesome. I can't wait to look at these photos and see how they turned out. Whew, it's cold though. Whew.
All right, so first, I'm just gonna apologize about the amount of times I said absolutely in that last little segment. I think maybe I had too much caffeine, or is the acceleration from how beautiful those conditions were, but yeah. One thing I found in my first excursion that I really loved in the R5 is that it has this little red record button right here on the grip. And what it does is if I'm shooting photos with the settings I want, I just hit the record button, it'll immediately switch over to a set of predetermined settings like a fixed shutter speed, auto ISO, and start recording video. Then when I hit it again to stop, it'll go right back to my photo settings, ready to take another picture. This is really helpful if I want to share a composition to you in the middle of taking my photos, and it just makes it a lot easier than have to switch into video mode, adjust the settings, turn a dial for those settings, and then have to adjust all again back into photo mode. This is a huge convenience, and this is exactly the type of features that I learned to love in a new camera. So could I have taken those shots with my old camera? Absolutely. The best thing about the R5 that it did for me was just got me into the mountains and be there for that moment. And I think that's really important to remember, is that gear is allowed to be fun and exciting. Sometimes it can reignite your hobby or get you out shooting a bit more. I certainly felt this when I was still shooting photography as a hobby all the time. You should never feel guilty about the excitement, especially when someone like me says to stop worrying so much about gear. Imagine you don't own a telephoto lens and you just bought one for the first time. There's so much to explore and do with the new focal length. It makes photography feel exciting again. And there's an entirely new world out there for opportunities for your photos. My whole point is that you won't suddenly become a better photographer with the latest and greatest equipment. But what you will do is become a better photographer if something new pushes you to just get out and practice more, gets you out shooting more, and simply increases your enjoyment of the craft. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you made it this far, please give the video a like. It helps me out the most. I'd love to hear what you think about anything I said throughout this video, and again, if you have interest in comparing those raw files for yourself, I have them linked down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.